Immediate chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantic. Flight downside, SPE off. SPE off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
Good morning, everybody.
Yeah. Hey, Thomas. How's it going this morning? We are live from Cape Canaveral, it looks like. Take it away, Thomas.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where you are looking live at Launch Complex 39A, where a Falcon 9 rocket is being prepared for liftoff today on yet another Starlink mission, the 14th Starlink mission, the 13th operational launch of the version 1.0 SpaceX Starlink Internet satellite. 60 satellites on board today. And Falcon 9 will be using a sixth flight of this first stage booster, booster 1051 on its sixth flight. That's tying SpaceX's Falcon 9 record. Of course, a brand new second stage, and then two fairing halves that are making their third flights today. So lots of reuse milestones today for yet another Starlink launch and the start of a very busy period here on the East Coast with a lot of launches coming up. We'll talk about that later. My name is Thomas Burkhart, editor and reporter for NASASpaceflight. I am also joined here at the Kennedy Space Center press site by NASA Spaceflight photographer Julia Bergeron. Julia, how are you?
Good morning, Thomas. Good morning, everyone. I am well.
And we're also joined in the studio by Michael Baylor and Das, as always, who will be running things behind the camera, and you'll probably hear them a little bit every once in a while. But for the meantime, if you have any questions about today's mission, feel free to put those into chat. If you tag us with @NASASpaceflight, we will be able to answer those questions and answer any questions you have about this launch or SpaceX or anything like that. Right now, we're still a few minutes away from the beginning of the main part of the countdown here. We'll be expecting at around T-minus 38 minutes is when the first big milestone will occur, which will be the go, no-go poll for propellant load. So right now we're still approaching that. As of now, no technical issues being worked that we're aware of, and weather is observed green today. So it looks like we are tracking for an on-time liftoff in just under an hour from now. But like I said, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. In the meantime, let's go through what we're expecting to see today. A very standard Starlink launch profile. Falcon 9 will lift off here at 8:25 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 12:25 UTC. And that launch will take off here from Launch Complex 39A, historic Launch Complex 39A. The pad which also hosts all of SpaceX's commercial crew launches and Falcon Heavy launches, but just serving its role as a standard Falcon 9 launcher today. This first stage will travel northeast from the Kennedy Space Center along the eastern coast of the United States. After the initial phase of flight, the first stage will attempt a landing on Of Course I Still Love You, a drone ship stationed out in the Atlantic Ocean. And if that goes well, this will be the sixth launch and landing for this particular booster. And of course, SpaceX will plan to bring it right back here to Port Canaveral and refurbish it for yet another flight. Meanwhile, the second stage and the payload stack and fairing will continue on towards orbit. The fairings will separate shortly after stage separation. Both fairing recovery vessels are also stationed downrange, Go Mystery and Go Mischief. So there should be, weather permitting and technical items permitting, another fairing recovery attempt for both halves. And again, both of these fairings are on their third flights today. Both halves of the fairing, I should say. So another recovery attempt there as well. And then the second stage and 60 Starlink satellites will continue all the way on to low Earth orbit and be deployed shortly after that. No rideshare payloads today, just a standard 60 Starlink and a satellite payload today. And yeah, other than that, a very standard Falcon 9 mission. This is actually the first of two Starlink missions planned for this week. Just later this week on Wednesday, around noon-ish Eastern time here, there will actually be yet another Starlink launch, the 15th Starlink mission, which will launch just over to our right off camera a bit at pad 40. And then there are several external customer missions coming up shortly after that. There's the Sirius XM-7 satellite. There is the Sentinel-6 satellite launching from Vandenberg Air Force Base, finally returning to Vandenberg after a brief hiatus over there. Also, we have the GPS-3 SV-04 satellite, which is still on the ground after that booster is troubleshooting some technical issues. But that next launch attempt should be coming up within the next couple weeks. There's also the NROL 108 mission, which will come up in the near future. And then here on the East Coast, we'll be turning our focus towards Crew 1, the next Crew Dragon mission, which of course launched from this same pad 39A. This is likely the last launch from 39A prior to Crew 1, as they do want to make sure the pad is ready for that all-important crew mission. But yeah, it's the start of a very busy period here on the East Coast, and that's just the SpaceX manifest. There's also a United Launch Alliance Delta IV Heavy, which is working through some final technical issues before it goes ready for its next launch attempt on the NROL 44 mission. And there's an Atlas V on Pad 41, which is in its launch preparations for the NROL 101 mission. So a very busy time on the range, but not least of which due to an extensive SpaceX manifest, starting with today's mission. Das or Michael, I don't know which one of you wants to relay any questions, but if we have some in chat, this would be a good time to start going through those.
Thomas, I think we've got Chris Gebhardt here with us this morning as
Oh
well.
my goodness, I completely forgot Chris. I'm so sorry. Chris Gebhardt is also here on commentary from Daytona Beach. Chris, how are you?
We'll check.
But that's okay. I was off doing something else. All good. But yes, good morning, everyone. How's it going?
So to go ahead and put those questions in the chat, and I guess we'll have Chris wants to relay those, and of course he can answer them as well. But if he wants to open those up, I think we can get into that.
I think he's getting online right now here, getting the question interface open, Thomas. So,
all right. Right now it's a little windy at the press site, but as far as we know, just a bit ago, the weather rules were all observed green. So not high enough to impede a liftoff today. So I apologize if the camera's shaking ever so slightly, but it's a little windier than last time. Last time we had a very smooth morning. The water at the turning basin is a little rougher today, but still a gorgeous morning. And the sun's peeking out of some clouds, finally getting some light, as you can see, of course. I don't know if someone in the studio wants to cut to our fleet cam really quick. I don't know if we have that available, but we can show another perspective of the weather over Cape Canaveral right now, since that's a toy we can now mess with.
did someone say fleet cam? There.
Yeah, I knew Dawes would do it. There you go. Yeah, gorgeous morning.
It is nice. God, that ship has been unloading for a couple of days now, but hopefully we get to see a rocket launch over the top of it. If we see the Starlink mission launch, it'll go right over the top of that bulk cargo carrier there that's over at Port Canaveral. The SpaceX docks, actually, you can see the drone ship just in front of the cargo ship there over at the port right now.
And that, of course, is the other drone ship that is not supporting this particular mission. Just read the instructions, although we will expect that to depart Port Canaveral very shortly, as, like I mentioned, there's yet another Starlink mission planned for Wednesday. So in order to get out, it probably has to leave today at some point. So we'll keep an eye on that. It might leave even before we end this webcast, but we'll see.
Yep, we'll be watching for it. If it does, we'll definitely let everyone know that it's happening.
Today's mission is being supported by the other drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, which is already stationed downrange and ready to support tonight's launch.
Good deal. How long have you been going this morning, Thomas? Did you you have a drive down to get down to the Cape, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got about 3 hours already this morning, so but always a motivating factor when you're going to see our rocket launch, so no worries here. I'm all set. We'll be lucky on Wednesday's lunches of like 12:30 or something, just after noon, so we'll have a little bit better time schedule-wise for Wednesday's launch. It was an early morning today, but it was a gorgeous morning. When we got here, it was all dark, and the 2 Starlink missions in a row. We got here and it was dark, and we saw the sunrise from Kennedy Space Center, so no complaints about that.
Excellent. And it does look like Chris will be online just in a couple seconds here. So, Thomas, if there is anything else we want to cover about this, what are we looking at? Just under 45 minutes, it looks like. So, what is the next big thing we're going to see on the pad here?
Absolutely. So on the pad right now, you're seeing a completely empty Falcon 9, well, other than the payload, I suppose. But the fuel tanks are all completely empty right now. Fueling has not started yet. The next big milestone will be at T-minus 38 minutes, which is when the SpaceX launch director will pull all of the launch teams to make sure they are all go for propellant loading to begin. Assuming that poll comes back go, we will actually see propellant loading begin at T-minus 35 minutes. And that will begin with Stage 1, LOX and kerosene loading, and Stage 2, kerosene loading. And then just a little later in the countdown, T-minus 16 minutes, I believe, is when LOX loading begins on the second stage. So that is when fueling will start. And once that begins, we usually hear it here from the press site because we can hear the fueling pumps spin up. And then we will start to see some vapors form around the rocket as those super cold propellants flow into Falcon 9 and condense the air around the rocket. So that will be a very visual sign that fueling is underway. And of course, we'll have the most obvious sign at T-minus 20 minutes when Falcon 9 and it's the transporter erector right next to it, gives off its signature T-minus 20 vent of liquid oxygen. So that will be another sign that fueling is continuing nominally. A little later in the countdown, the next big milestone after fueling is underway will be at T-minus 7 minutes, which is when the 9 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage are thermally conditioned for launch. That's called a process known as engine chill down, and then that will bring us right down to T-minus 1 minute and the final go for launch and Falcon 9 going into startup ahead of a liftoff at T-minus 0. So a completely standard Falcon 9 countdown. This is what all the recent Falcon 9 Block 5 missions countdown looks like. And yeah, so the next big milestone is at T-minus 38 minutes when the go, no-go poll for propellant loading begins.
Gotcha. And so, question that I've never really even thought of before. I don't know if we've ever been in this situation before, but let's see here. There we go. The crew missions also launch from the same pad. So we've got pad 39A, and the crew mission that's coming up, crew 1, is supposed to launch from there. And then also we've got Starlink satellites launching from there. So is it possible that it's some sort of issue or some sort of accident with a rocket on the pad for Starlink satellites could actually delay or prevent our ability to launch crew for some amount of time? Have we ever been in that situation before? Because shuttle was the last thing launching off of this, and that was always crew and cargo.
Right, so yeah, during the shuttle program, the only rockets that were using pad 39A, for example, was the space shuttle, so there was no uncrewed missions sharing the pad with it. But of course, SpaceX is using 39A, which is a larger launch pad and already had the fixed service structure from the shuttle program to support larger rockets such as Falcon Heavy. Falcon Heavy cannot launch from the other Cape Canaveral pad at pad 40, has to launch from 39A. And then, of course, because of the fixed service structure with the Crew X's tower and the emergency egress system and all of that, is why all the commercial crew missions also have to launch from pad 39A. So you are correct that these Starlink missions can launch from either pad, but they do use both of them to allow them to increase their launch cadence. Now, you ask about if something were to occur at the pad during today's launch, would that impact Crew 1? And I would say absolutely. Obviously, if it's some sort of major anomaly, we'd be looking at problems with the launch vehicle itself, in which case, no matter what pad you're launching from, like if Falcon 9 has an in-flight anomaly of some kind, that will absolutely ground the Falcon 9 fleet until that's resolved. So regardless of what pad it launches from, that would have an impact on the upcoming crew missions. If it's something where the Falcon 9 goes fine and something weird happens at the pad, like, I don't know, if the sound suppression system doesn't quite work or the Falcon 9 lifts off and there's some weird damage to the pad more than usual, that could, of course, impact the Crew 1 mission. But that's a pretty rare occurrence. I don't think I can recall anything like that really happening as far as like weird, like extra pad damage than normal. Usually those things are actually checked, like the sound suppression water system, for example, is one of the things that gets checked by all the computers right before liftoff. And if that system isn't quite working, the launch will be aborted at the last second before liftoff. Not least because the sound suppression system doesn't just protect the pad, it also protects the rocket itself during the first couple seconds. So yeah, so if something were to happen, that would absolutely impact Crew 1, but odds are if something happens during any Falcon 9 launch, regardless of what pad it's going for, it would also impact the Crew 1 and any other upcoming Falcon 9 missions. So It's not really a consideration. The biggest consideration for choosing whether they can launch a mission from 39A ahead of a crew mission is just how much time it usually takes to prepare a pad between missions, which is a couple weeks usually. And with the Crew 1 mission not scheduled now until no earlier than November 11th, and again, that's a tentative date, could be later. This particular mission is launching well enough in advance of the Crew 1 mission to not cause any conflicts there. They'll have plenty of time to get the pad ready for the next crew mission.
Gotcha. And I think we've got Chris online now. Chris, are you online?
Yep. Sure am.
Cool. Welcome back, Chris. Do you want to go through chat or our panel and bring in some questions?
Yeah, definitely. So Blake Parsons here with a $15 super chat. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, including Zad with a new membership here, and that boy Alan Worldwide with another new membership. Thanks so much. Thanks so much to both of you. Ben Straight with a $20 super chat with coffee funds. Much appreciated for everyone on here today. And Bill Sturgeon with £5 saying, "What, you guys? You're up and it's not 3 a.m.? Thanks anyway, and here's for a small contribution." That's got to be in reference to all of the Starship streams from this week, right, guys?
Yeah, and really quick, Chris, I wanted to interrupt. We have an update. They just pulled go for propellant load.
All right, so go for propellant load at this time as they keep ticking down toward the launch of a Starlink mission here today from pad 39A at 8:25 is our liftoff time today, as Thomas has been alluding to. And Thomas, we got some other questions here that have also come in, including the first one. Raju wants to know how long is our launch window today?
Excellent question. And we are on the standard Falcon 9 launch profile. We also have the standard Falcon 9 Starlink launch window, which is actually a 20-minute window. However, because it's only 20 minutes, and that's 10 minutes on either side of the actual targeted launch time of 8:25, it is effectively an instantaneous launch window, and that's because the Starlink launches all target very specific orbital planes where they want these particular satellites to be deployed. So it is effectively an instantaneous launch window. And now that we have pulled go for prop load, which will begin at T-minus 35 minutes, once that begins, we are committed to that launch time. Should any weather or technical issues come up after that point, it would have to be a scrub for the day and a recycle to their next launch attempt, which would be no earlier than tomorrow. They have a backup opportunity tomorrow as well. But right now, everything proceeding nominally and heading towards that effectively instantaneous window at 8:25 Eastern.
Gotcha. And someone's talking about saying that the nose cone looks a bit pointy, but there's something at the top of the nose cone now, right, Thomas, that they started putting on last year that in certain lighting conditions can kind of make it look a bit different, right, up there at the top?
Yeah, before I allude to that real quick, I should report that we did just hear all the fueling systems over on the pad spin up, so we can confirm that fueling is about to get underway. But yes, at the very top tip of the payload fairing, you can see there's a bit of a darker pit. I forget when we first saw that. I feel like it was a while ago. But yes, there's, I think it's just an extra bit of thermal protection for the very top of the fairing, which of course will experience peak heating on the way up from aerodynamic forces. So that's a bit of just extra heat protection to protect that top of the fairing, which of course is very important, especially since they are reusing these fairings and flying them over and over again. They want to protect them adequately.
Indeed, and we are just under 35 minutes now, which means that the fueling process has gotten underway for the Falcon 9 today in the form of the start of the launch auto sequence here at 39A, which basically hands off control of everything in the fueling systems and the rocket to Falcon 9's onboard computers, with the launch team monitoring there in the background and able to abort if needed, but fueling operations underway at pad 39A as we duck under the 35-minute mark to our liftoff here today. And another good question here from Corey Black Thomas. He says, that windsock looks like it's dancing around a bit. What is the weather looking like for launch today?
Yes, it is, and there is a bit of a breeze. It's not as windy as it has been. It's been windier, and we've still had launches. So, but it's not a very calm morning like we had during the more recent Starlink launch. It is a little bit of a breeze today, but it's still a beautiful morning. And like we said, weather is observed green at this time, so that wind is not a concern for liftoff right now. Just a light breeze at the press site and at 39A today.
Awesome. And Arcadia with a good question here that I'm actually going to add a third part to. So Acadia wants to know, is there a difference between Port Canaveral and Cape Canaveral? I only hear Port Canaveral when you're talking about fleet cam. So that's the question from Acadia. And Thomas, I'm going to throw in another one here and ask, what is also the difference between those two, Port Canaveral and Cape Canaveral, and the Kennedy Space Center, where we are today, or where you are today, and Julia is today?
Excellent. Yes, there are different areas of the broader area, which some people just call Cape Canaveral. But in reality, it's actually broken up into a couple different sections. Right now, I am standing at the Launch Complex 39 press site along with Julia, which is right next to the vehicle assembly building and the historic countdown clock, if you're familiar with that. And you're looking at pad 39A. And just to our left is Launch Complex 39B. All of those facilities are on the Kennedy Space Center, which is owned and operated by NASA. Just over to our right, however, there is a set of security gates and fences, which actually changes the property over to the Air Force and soon the Space Force, although they haven't completely transitioned that part yet. But the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, which controls all of the other launch pads. So that includes Launch Complex 41, where Atlas V and Vulcan will lift off. Launch Complex 40 with Falcon 9, Launch Complex 37 for Delta IV Heavy, the Blue Origin Launch Complex, and all of there's some small sat launch complexes being built down that way as well. And all of those are on the Air Force Station side. Also home to landing zones 1 and 2 for SpaceX. Those, of course, not in use today. It's a drone ship landing today. But all of those facilities are actually on the Air Force side of Cape Canaveral. And then that is to our south. And then farther south from that is Port Canaveral, which is, of course, the giant port where all of the space recovery ships are based out of, all of the SpaceX fleet, as well as, of course, plenty of non-space marine operations. But yeah, so there's actually 3 different distinct areas here on the broader area that we know as Cape Canaveral.
Awesome. That is always a good question, because one of the wonderful little pieces of trivia that I love out there, Thomas, is in regard to pad 41, where the Atlas launches, and which is technically Kennedy Space Center property that is leased to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and then thereby leased to United Launch Alliance. So it's technically a Kennedy-owned pad, but it's operated by the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, which I think is one of the coolest things about like where just the line is literally drawn across the road when you're driving between the 2 bases and everything. Some really cool things that you can transition between there. Got a couple more super chats, and then there's a whole list of questions here for you, Thomas. So a Rough Riders shows up every single time. Really appreciate it, Rough Riders, with the $2 super chat saying good morning, y'all. Or I'm sorry, good morning, all. I should not have put the Y in front of there. Apologies, deep apologies. That's something you don't do in the South if it's not written. So apologies. And then Nathan Walton with £2. Can you shoot Connor O'Neill some love? He is 6. Yes, Connor. Yes, some love and a shout out here from the NASA spaceflight crew. Hopefully there's a nice rocket launch here coming up in about half an hour for you. And Thomas, some more questions here for you as we roll on through the 30-minute mark, and all appears to be going well so far with the count. Not so much a question, but one I wanted to include because we both know the rabbit hole this is going to create. The Random Tube is saying, I am playing Kerbal Space Program for the first time today. Any tips?
Don't forget to go fast sideways. That's the part that everyone forgets. Orbit isn't going straight up. You got to get above the atmosphere and then go really fast sideways. That's the key to Kerbal.
Yeah, indeed. My tip for Kerbal Space Program is start with Kerbal. Start with the basic stock version. Get used to how the game handles and how it plays before moving on to the harder real solar system overhaul, which requires quite a bit of modding to make it work. And if that's something you're interested in, I would definitely say start with the stock version of the game that comes just with the download. And get used to it first. Also, kiss all of your free time goodbye because this game is addictive. So say goodbye to your loved ones for a few weeks and then delve in. Definitely. And Thomas, there's one here that I kind of want to circle back to. It's a totally different question from the one that had completely been asked, but I think this one's a good segue into the change that's coming with the payload fairing for the Falcon 9. So Patty MTB, was asking, is the nose cone designed differently from previous launches? Now, I know we already talked about what might look different on this one, but there is a redesign of the SpaceX fairing coming, correct?
Yes, so what you're looking at right now is the same payload fairing that's been flying for several years now. With no major changes. The most recent change was when they adapted it for recovery and reuse. But other than that, the payload fairing shape is the same as it has been for a while now. But what's coming up is a new extended fairing that will be taller than the one you're currently looking at, and that is part of the National Security Space Launch Program. SpaceX awarded some development funds to support that, as well as some other things, including some upgrades here at Pad 39A, to support a vertical integration of payloads onto Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets. But yes, so we will see a new payload fairing in the next couple years, and that is interesting because they will use that for larger national security payloads, and also notably the Lunar Gateway, which we are expecting to launch on a Falcon Heavy mission, that will use the extended payload fairing as well. So we will see a new payload fairing in the near future. But the one you're looking at right now is the same standard payload fairing that's been flying for a couple years now.
And Slar here wanting to know what booster are we using today, Thomas?
We are using booster 1051 today on its sixth flight, so 1051.6. And this is the booster that made its debut on the Demo 1 mission, the uncrewed flight of Crew Dragon. Off the top of my head, I'm going to try and remember the rest of the missions. I believe it was the RadarSat constellation mission from Vandenberg for the Canadian Space Agency, and then 3 previous Starlink missions. I hope I didn't mess that up, but I'm pretty sure those are the 5 previous flights, with another Starlink mission as its 6th flight for booster 1051.
There we go. And and for those just joining, so we are about 26 minutes away from the liftoff of a Falcon 9 here at 8:25 a.m. local time from Launch Complex 39A, which is 12:25 UTC. And that is when we are expecting our liftoff today. The 2 fairing catcher ships, Go Mystery and Go Mischief, are about 730 kilometers northeast of the Kennedy Space Center, waiting to catch the payload fairing halves. And of course, I Still Love You, the drone ship, is about 630 kilometers northeast of the Cape and Kennedy, waiting to catch this booster, which will be flying for the 6th time this morning after making its debut, as Thomas was just saying, from 39A last year.
And this booster making its 6th flight does tie SpaceX's record. There's another Falcon 9 booster, booster 1049, which has also flown 6 times. This will be the 2nd booster to fly a 6th mission. And of course, both of these boosters, assuming today's launch and landing are successful, are expected to make 7th flights and so on. So they will continue flying, but this is one of the veterans of the current active SpaceX Falcon 9 fleet. Also, on your screen, if you look towards the base of the rocket, you can see some vapors starting to form around the rocket, another visual sign that fueling is indeed underway. Those super cold rocket propellant 1 kerosene and liquid oxygen filling Falcon 9's tanks and condensing the air around it and forming water vapor is all you're seeing there. And just another sign that fueling is indeed underway and Falcon 9 is getting ready to go to space.
Yeah. All right, and this one is actually one that Michael's going to help us with on the back end here. So we have a $10 super chat actually from Philip Moyer. Thanks so much for the support, Philip. And he's asking, is there any better source for current weather than the 45th web page, which currently just has L-1? Why, yes, there is, and we can actually put it up there on screen for you. So there you can see it's 79 degrees Fahrenheit under sunny conditions here at the Kennedy Space Center right now. And Michael, that's a little weather overlay that we have access to that we discovered too with the Soyuz launch earlier this week, can bring up accurate weather from any launch site around the world that we, or at least the ones that we've tested it at so far.
Yeah, correct. It should be able to do pretty much any city on the planet.
Yeah. So there you go. There is the live look at the weather at the Cape Canaveral at Kennedy Space Center. Totally clear, 8.9 knots for winds, 79 degrees Fahrenheit, 26 Celsius. The current conditions out at Launch Pad 39A. Yes. So Jim, thanks so much for the super chat. Alan Gable with $20. Thanks so much for the support. Rocket as well with the £1 super chat. All of this is very, very much appreciated. It's the super chats and the channel memberships and simply watching our streams like this, simply sitting through that ad at the beginning that really helps us with what we like to call the NSF Battle Fund, to be able to bring you these launches like this morning, to be able to bring you Fleet Cam, and to be able to bring you a few other exciting projects that we're still working on, but not quite ready to talk about just yet. So thank you everyone so much for this. All right, so Ray is asking here with a $5 super chat as well. Thanks guys for the Q&A. Would you explain the Starlink deorbiting process and how they bring the satellites back down?
Sure. So the Starlink satellites after launch are deployed into a relatively low orbit. I'm not going to say numbers because off the top of my head, they keep changing them anyway, so I don't want to misquote them anyway. But they are deployed lower than their actual operational orbit. And that's to give them time to space out all the satellites to deploy their solar arrays and make sure all their systems are online and checked out after launch. And then they will begin maneuvering towards their operational orbits, which includes both raising their altitude and sometimes drifting into a slightly different orbital plane than they were actually launched into. But overall, during that phase, when all the satellites are being checked out, should any satellite not be fully operational or have some technical issues, and they don't want to deploy it into its orbit, even if they can't control that satellite, they are left in a very low orbit that will actually decay within just a couple months. So that is SpaceX's method of making sure any satellites that are dead on arrival are deorbited quickly and responsibly. Any satellites that fail later on in the process, if they start maneuvering and then encounter an issue or fail on later, they can, as long as the satellite is still under control of SpaceX, they can just fire its Hall thrusters retrograde and slow it down and allow it to at least either lower its orbit so it will degrade naturally, or just deorbit all the way and I'll make sure it re-enters quickly. Even if in its operational orbit, should a SpaceX Starlink satellite fail, it is still a fairly low Earth orbit, and that means the satellite will decay within a somewhat reasonable amount of time. But to accelerate that, that's why they do those checkouts at a lower orbital altitude, and only allow the satellites to proceed to their operational height should the Starlink satellite pass all of its post-launch checks correctly.
Gotcha. And Uncle Ned here with a $5 Australian super chat saying, another beautiful day for another beautiful launch. Here's another $5 for the battle funds. Much appreciated, Uncle Ned. And Mike Smith saying, go, 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 Texas Tank Watchers with a $50 super chat. Thank you so much, Mike. That means a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely. A lot of appreciation for everyone who sends super chats and watches these streams. We greatly appreciate your support, and we're glad you're joining us for today's launch.
Indeed, and a quick check, we're about 20 minutes away there, so fueling of RP-1 kerosene into the second stage is still underway here, and we'll be wrapping up momentarily. If you've got questions, go ahead and put them up in chat and tag us at NASASpaceflight. It does help us see it on the back end here a little bit quicker. Got a lot of questions here already in the queue, so if I haven't gotten to yours just yet, we're rolling through, but if you've got new ones or if you're just joining us and you've got a question, let us know, because there's that big T-minus 20-minute event telling us that all is on track and that Falcon 9 is feeling good so far for liftoff here today.
Absolutely. That is telltale sign that everything is proceeding nominally, just a liquid oxygen vent from the transporter erector. Again, it looks big and dramatic, but that is completely nominal. It's a normal part of every Falcon 9 countdown, and it's just another sign that fueling and pre-launch preparations are going nominally.
Yes, indeed. So, real quick, Thomas, Rob Heifel wanted to know, is the other Falcon 9 on 40 visible this morning?
An excellent question. I can report that it is not. There is nothing on Pad 40 just yet, although I suspect very shortly after this mission we will see a Falcon 9 rollout. Off the top of my head, I'm not remembering which booster we think that mission is for. Michael, do you know?
Which booster number? Is that the
Yeah,
question?
for the other Starlink mission.
Yeah, we're not sure yet.
We don't know. Okay, because that usually would indicate whether or not they're going to do a static fire. We had a static fire for this mission just the other day, and that is likely because it is on its 6th flight today. So the boosters that are kind of towards the forefront of how many flights a Falcon 9 can fly so far, they usually want some extra data, and they do static fires. For the boosters that aren't quite as veteran, if you will, that only have a couple flights, SpaceX has sometimes been foregoing the static fires. So I was trying to figure out if we might expect a static fire or if they'll just roll it out and launch it. Obviously, if they're doing a static fire, they have to roll it out a little bit earlier. But yeah, right now, nothing visible on Pad 40 just yet.
Yeah, and just to sort of piggyback on this, because this is admittedly a somewhat odd situation that we find ourselves in, right, where there was a seemingly significant problem with the brand new Starlink booster that was launching the GPS, the fourth GPS 3 mission for SpaceX earlier, in September, toward the end of September, that had the engine abort on the pad after the start sequence. So it's a little odd to see missions continuing when we know other missions are being delayed as a result of it, right? Like, for example, Thomas, right, we know that Crew 1 has been delayed because of that particular issue, but obviously the Starlink missions are going. And it's worth noting that, this could be a couple of things. It doesn't necessarily point toward one or the other, but it's worth remembering that these missions of Starlink are internal to SpaceX. So there is a little bit more risk that they can accept with them than maybe they would accept on a paying customer's flight. Could also indicate that it's a problem that isn't necessarily generic across the entire Falcon family. That's something that they were seeing was very specific to that booster, and they just want to understand it. Or it could indicate something is up with the newer round of boosters, and the previous ones are fine. So I know people are probably wondering about that, and those are the three things that it would seem to indicate. SpaceX has not said definitively one way or the other what this is, but of course the one thing we do know from the Starlink missions proceeding is that whatever the issue is, the 45th Space Wing does not consider it a safety issue that would cause them to step in and say you can't fly. So whatever this issue is that they're working through with the engines on Falcon 9 and the gas generator, those are sort of the options of where we all are with these flights of Starlink proceeding as they are. And Thomas, everyone's favorite question from Renee. Any updates on the new drone ship, or the third drone ship that we keep hearing about that's promised and out there on the horizon?
Gee, resident fleet watcher Julia, any updates on the third drone ship yet?
Well, since we broadcast from Port Canaveral, I have heard nothing on that new drone ship, and I have yet to locate it. So it's still rather a mystery. I was chatting about it with Gavin from SpaceX Fleet Updates, and I think we both came to an agreement that when this drone ship does show up, it better show up with fireworks coming into that port.
There we go. That's a good one, right?
You bet.
Yeah. All right. So for Thomas and Julia, actually, because we've gotten this question a lot, so I'm just going to pick one of the ones that I saw. No particular order for who got picked, but Pink Mouse and a bunch of others are asking, is that a house in the bottom left-hand part of the screen on the shot there? If so, nice viewing for launches. with a smiley face indicating that they know this is not a private house. But what are we looking at? What are the structures that we're actually seeing between the camera and 39A? And precisely where are you, Thomas and Julia, set up today?
Well, I just posted a picture from where we are, looking in a different direction. So we are at the 39A press site at Kennedy Space Center. So immediately to our left is the VAB, or Vehicle Assembly Building. And the buildings in the foreground are actually different support buildings at Kennedy Space Center, ones that support fueling and day-to-day operations as well. So you'll see different hangars. To the right of the launch pad view is actually, I do believe, the viewing gantry that the Visitors Center uses, which has not been in use recently due to COVID. So they can't run bus tours out here. Buses are not something we really want to, put that as extra risk on. So we do have the viewing gantry there. But many of these buildings are actually right along the Crawlerway Road, and they're hangars, and they support operations at both 39A and 39B.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of like little structures and little areas that are just kind of peppered throughout the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, where you just kind of go through wilderness for a bit, and then all of a sudden there's a cluster of buildings, and then you're back in wilderness and a wildlife preserve. Most of the time, it's kind of cool to drive by because the scenery does change quite a bit, right, Julia, when you're on base?
You know what, though? Hey, Chris, there is one house out here yet, isn't there?
There's one.
There's one, and it's the beach house. And it is actually the only remaining house from the residents that used to live out here before it became the refuge and then the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. So that is still remaining on the beach near Launch Complex 40 and 37. And the astronauts did indeed spend some time there with their families ahead of demo mission 2. So we look forward to seeing them out there again before Crew 1.
Indeed. All right, so there's a bunch of other super chat questions that have come in here since we've been doing this. Julia, one of the questions that has come up a couple of times here is, do we have any word on whether approval or installation of Starlink terminals has taken place on, of course, I Still Love You and Just Read the Instructions, the 2 drone ships yet?
Well, honestly, I haven't seen anything publicly said that there are, but I can tell you I have not spotted a dish on either of the drone ships yet. But I can also say that we sure seem to have a little bit better uplink when a booster is landing. So could there be a dish hidden on deck? That is quite a possibility. The other thing is they also do create their own hazard zone when they are out at the landing zone. And SpaceX is the first entity to actually be able to broadcast and cover their own basically hazard area while they are out at sea. So you do need a little bit more equipment to support something along those lines. But have I actually seen one? No, I have not.
Gotcha. And at T-minus 11 minutes here, Thomas, you want to give us a status update of how things are progressing there at 39A?
Absolutely. So we are well into the final phase of propellant loading right now. Kerosene and liquid oxygen flowing into both stages at this point. We're just over 10 minutes away from liftoff, and fueling is proceeding nominally. No technical issues being worked. Weather is still green. And the next milestone coming up will be at T-minus 7 minutes when Falcon 9 engine chill begins. And during that process, just a little bit of liquid oxygen will be flowed through the 9 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage, and that just cools the plumbing down in those engines to thermally condition them for ignition, so that the full flow of super cold propellant through the engine plumbing does not cause any damage at engine start. So that is the next milestone coming up, but right now everything on track for liftoff in just about 10 minutes.
Indeed, 10 minutes, 13 seconds per the ticker there in the upper left-hand corner. And Thomas, I just got to say, like, the view here this morning is really killer with the way the sunlight and the humidity is sort of playing off of each other in the morning atmosphere, because I'm now understanding, now that I've finally taken the view to full screen after getting done with the other things that I was doing here, why we're getting so many questions about the payload fairing, because boy, that tip at that different color tip at the top of it is very pronounced in our feed today. So that's why we're getting so many questions about the payload fairing. I now definitely understand, but you can see all that vapor there on the first stage, all that condensation, just sort of sticking around the first stage booster Falcon 9 here. So another question here from Elliot that I can take really quick from Elliot K is, how soon will the Starlink constellation be operational? Well, it kind of depends on what you mean by operational. If you mean operational in terms of when will everyone, no matter where you live in the US and Canada and Australia, which are the three countries that have given approval for Starlink operations at this point, it really depends on what latitude you're at for your coordinates of where your city is on Earth. Above 43 degrees north and 43 degrees south, depending on what hemisphere you're in there for the US, Canada, and Australia, has coverage already to be an active public beta testing mode. So they are actively testing the system at the 43-degree parallel, both north and south of the equator, and north of there in the northern hemisphere, south of there in the southern. They anticipate needing about, what was it, Thomas? About 800 satellites before they could start getting some of that initial test coverage lower than the 45th parallel and sort of down toward the tropics. With this particular flight, they'll meet that goal. Assuming this flight is successful, there will have been 835 Starlink satellites launched to date, including the 2 Tintins and the 60 of the first batch that are not part of the quote-unquote operational constellation. But that is where we currently stand with the Starlink constellation network. A reminder to everyone watching, if you want to sign up to be a beta tester, or you want to sign up to know when service for Starlink is available in your area, you can go to the main Starlink website that is offered, and you can enter your zip code and your name, and they will send you notifications when testing or service becomes available in your area. But this week, it was really exciting because Australia formally approved all of their regulatory processes for Starlink operations as well, and became the third nation to join the growing list of nations and regions that are actively approving Starlink and actively setting it up for use. Eventually, Europe is the other big market that they're currently waiting for regulatory approval for right now. But that's where we stand right now, and at 6 minutes and 45 seconds to go, here, there's one question here that pertains to the liftoff, and I think that's a great segue to get us into launch mode here, Thomas. So GTA Vandermoor is wanting to know what happens to the second stage after the deployment of the satellites.
A great question. As this is a mission to low Earth orbit, the second stage will conduct a deorbit burn after deploying these Starlink satellites, and that will allow the stage to destructively re-enter safely in Earth's atmosphere, not leaving behind a empty second stage left in orbit. That is a standard procedure for the Starlink missions and for most missions that go to low Earth orbit.
There we go. And really quick, Thomas, I know we ran through this, but for the people who have joined, especially on our feed right here, you can see that black/silver tip at the top of the fairing. What is that designed to do?
Yes, and like Chris did mention just a little bit earlier, the visibility today for some reason is really pronouncing the tip of that payload fairing. But all it is a little bit of extra thermal protection, basically some heat shielding material. I don't even know off the top of my head exactly what it is. I don't know if the public knows what it is. But it is, what we do know is just a little extra thermal protection for the tip of the fairing. During ascent, the fairing's purpose is to protect the satellites on board from aerodynamic forces, which includes heating during the initial phase of flight. And the very tip of that fairing is the point that will get the hottest due to air resistance and things like that. So there's just a little extra heat protection on the tip of the
And
fairing.
you can actually, sorry to interrupt, you can actually see it perfectly because SpaceX just switched their official feed to a tight shot of the fairing and the nose and the different color there at the nose cap while you were answering that question. So perfect timing, SpaceX webcast. Thank you.
And
Thank you
also
once
on the
again.
topic of fairings, they also just briefly showed the two fairing recovery vessels, both of which have their catch nets up. So that is a good sign that 2 fairing recovery attempts will also take place today, which is excellent.
So we are hoping, and here at 4 minutes, 30 seconds and counting, we have a bunch of other questions that are still in our queue that we will get to as Falcon 9 heads uphill and as they head toward deployment. So if you haven't heard your question, don't fret just yet. But I also want to make a pitch here based on a question that we got from Ozian, who wanted to know if our merchandise was available in the United Kingdom. Yes, indeed, it is available in the United Kingdom, available any country in the world. Actually, if you head on over to NASASpaceflight.com /shop, we're going to throw that up in the chat on the chat here. But yeah, if you head on over to NASASpaceflight.com /shop, you can find our merchandise. And the questions that were being asked about taxes and everything like that is nope, the taxes that you see or the price that you see at checkout is what you pay. So you don't get hit with any unexpected fees or anything when you go to pick up your merchandise or anything like that that we are aware of. If you wind up having that happen, please let us know because you shouldn't have to based on the way we have the system set up. So you should be all good to go with all of that.
Hey, Chris, John here back in the studio. I want to point out something really quickly. We may have a crazy shot on the fleet cam because just read the instructions is in the turning basin preparing to depart right now. So I don't know if it's going to get underway in the next 3 minutes, but if so, you're going to see the Falcon 9 from 39A launching over the top of the other drone ship back at Port Canaveral in the turning basin. That's Lauren Foss, the tug right there, getting ready to pull it out for its next mission. So that may be a shot that we get here in a minute.
I now want nothing more than for that shot to line up. That would be so cool.
Right.
And I should also point out, so as we're getting into the business end of this countdown, just 2.5 minutes to go. It is a crystal clear day, some clouds in the distance, but our view from the press site is perfect.
And there's the water tower overflowing behind you, Thomas. Yes.
Yep, and that is, of course, also a nominal part of the pre-launch sequence as part of the ground support systems at 39A. But yes, a clear day, and I don't want to jinx it, but the U.S. flag here at the press site is blowing directly from the pad to our camera. There is potential for a loud liftoff this morning. I'm hoping for some good Rocket Merlin sounds today.
Well, to channel my inner DOS, why don't we go ahead and get reconfigured for liftoff in audio comms and everything like we normally do, since we are 1 minute and 55 away. And as you do that, Thomas, I'll go ahead and do a quick wrap up here. So what you're looking at live is pad 39A from the camera that Thomas has at the press site. We are 1 minute and 42 seconds away from the planned liftoff of the 14th mission of Starlink. You can see the rough 2-minute vent happening there from the transporter erector. You can also see the water tower gushing on the left-hand side. That is normal. How do you tell when a water tower is full? You just fill it up to its overflow limit and let it gush out, and that's how you know it's full. All of that water will soon, in about a minute, be dumping onto and into pad 39A to provide sound and acoustical protection to the vehicle and the pad systems at Merlin Engine Ignition liftoff. At T-minus 1 minute, Thomas, are we ready to go audio-wise?
Yep, we're all set here. Just
all right.
That's already done, Thomas. We're good to go.
And do we have audio up on the stream for everyone, Michael?
Okay, cool.
Yes, we do.
Cool.
All right, so you're not going to hear me on an ever so slight delay, but that's because we've switched to our more formal microphone, which will capture the beautiful noises of Merlin 1D rumble at liftoff here, and we are just under 30 seconds now, so let's stand by for liftoff of Falcon 9. We have stage 1 ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket from 39A on the latest Starlink mission. Vehicle has cleared the tower. Throttling down for maximum aerodynamic pressure, or max Q. An absolutely thunderous liftoff today. You can see the contrail of Falcon 9 as it ascends into the atmosphere. And once it's through max Q, the 9 Merlin 1D engines will throttle back up to full power. See the exhaust plume expanding as Falcon 9 reaches higher altitudes and lower air pressures. We'll now be standing by for MECO, main engine cutoff, and stage separation. Falcon 9 goes behind its own contrail again. This is the second straight launch that has happened, but I think we've lost it from here. Oh, nope, we've got it back. And there is MECO, main engine cutoff. Stages are separating. And there we have it, stage 2 ignition. The vacuum Merlin engine on Falcon 9 second stage has ignited. And the Falcon 9 first stage is preparing to return to Earth and land on Of Course I Still Love You. And I think I've lost it from here, guys.
All right,
Yeah,
and
so
that's
you're now seeing on the screen the official SpaceX feed.
all right, and
let me
Thomas,
know
we
when I
just
can
heard
just go back to
confirmation
a
of
real-time audio, DOS.
Your go for real time, Thomas. Go ahead.
All right, welcome back. And as Chris was just saying, we had a call out for successful deployment of the grid fins there, and payload fairing separation has also just occurred.
Yes, indeed. I love on the payload fairing separations how you can see how the payload fairings kind of flex and wobble right there at the moment of separation. That's always really cool when you see that. But Thomas, I wanted to say too, great tracking shot there all the way through stage 2 ignition. Awesome tracking shots from our camera.
Thanks, Chris. We've gotten lucky. My 2 tracking shots so far have both been on picture clear days. The only problem I keep running into, Falcon 9 keeps flying behind its own contrail, which doesn't help me. But
well, if
we've
it's
had 2 clear days, yeah.
Well, if it's any consolation, I did run outside here in Daytona to see it with my own 2 eyes, and it had to be about a second before stage shutdown and separation. It went behind a gigantic cloud. So I feel you.
And Chris and Thomas, I don't know if y'all saw it. Thomas, I know you were busy there, but we did get the shot from the fleet cam. We had just read the instructions being pulled by a tug Lauren Foss, and then in the background you could see the Falcon 9 lifting off from 39A and then all the way up off the top of the screen. So you'll definitely see a time lapse of that later. I just switched to the tug for just a second as the or actually to the fleet cam for just a second as just read the instructions heads out for that next mission.
Yeah, now we have a rather large accumulation of ice on the engine nozzle there that we just saw kind of slide down the engine assembly on the second stage of Falcon 9. No one panic, it's ice. It's fine. You might even see it fly off out of there. I know there'll be many, many things online after that, but it's just ice, which forms quite routinely as these stages ascend into vacuum and the temperatures get really, really cold and water condenses and freezes down there. So nothing to worry about there, and nothing that would be a cause for concern.
So what you're looking at right now on the left side of your screen is Falcon 9's first stage, returning to Earth. You can see the grid fins have deployed. Those will be used for aerodynamic control on the way down once atmospheric entry begins. But next up during flight will be the entry burn, which will protect Falcon 9's first stage on the way down from the forces during reentry. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, you see the Merlin 1D vacuum engine, which is continuing to power the Starlink satellites to orbit. Also not seen on your screen are the two fairing halves, which are also slowly returning to Earth. They will not make their recovery attempt until about 45 minutes after launch, well after our live coverage will end, so you'll have to stay tuned to social media for continuing coverage of that attempt. But right now, we're looking for Falcon 9 first stage entry burn, which will come up in just a second, and there it is. Ignition of 3 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage.
Yeah, and then the SpaceX feed is actually arriving to us a little bit on a little bit of a delay. So the delay is on SpaceX's side, not on our side. So that's why we heard the call out of landing burn or entry burn complete right before we saw it begin. But yeah, that delay is on SpaceX's side for the broadcast, not on ours.
Chris, we're running about 7 seconds shy of live today, and SpaceX is about 25 seconds behind us. So it honestly looks like SpaceX has put in a little bit more of an intentional delay lately. The last couple of streams I've seen have had that sort of consistent delay that's almost up to 30 seconds at this point. So we do get a little bit of desync there, but all good.
Yeah.
So what you saw was a successful entry burn, and then of course, as usual, we lost the onboard camera feed as it goes through reentry itself. That's completely normal, not a sign of anything going wrong. What will happen next is the first stage will light up one Merlin 1D engine, deploy its landing legs, and hopefully touch down on, of course, I Still Love You, so we'll stay tuned for that. Right now, the second stage is also continuing on to orbit, and even though the launch is not quite over yet, we are seeing DOS's favorite sight after launch, an empty launch pad, Launch Complex 39A with no rocket on board. Next time we'll see a rocket is probably Crew 1, so very exciting.
And the landing burn is underway, and Stage 2 has entered terminal guidance. All right, it landed. We did not get any visual of it whatsoever on the drone ship, but Stage 1 has landed successfully on, of course, I Still Love You. And this is the delay. We are getting video of it. Spoilers.
There you go. Beautiful shot.
Picture
Yeah,
perfect.
we got a big desync between the SpaceX audio and the SpaceX webcast, but we did confirm that it landed, and there you have the visual of it standing proud on, of course, I Still Love You. This is the 6th launch and landing for this booster, and this booster 1051 will hopefully fly again after returning to port. And of course, you can guarantee we'll have coverage of its return to port via Fleet Cam now. But there you have it.
Go ahead, Thomas, yeah.
Yep, and I was just about to say we've had SECO 1, second engine cut off of the Falcon 9 upper stage. There is now a long coast phase prior to reignition of the second stage. I'm not sure if we're going to stay live all the way to that because we will have to leave the press site here in a little bit, at least I will. But we have had a successful early phase of flight, and the second stage and Starlink satellites now coasting towards a second burn prior to spacecraft deployment.
Indeed. And DOS's favorite shot, right, DOS?
I switched to it. I had to switch to a full screen there. Sorry. Folks, the reference is that this view right here is my favorite view on launch day, an empty launch pad, but this one is even better.
Successful stage in orbit. Yes. Very, very much so. Jim with a super chat saying congratulations to everyone involved. Another super chat here from Edson as well, and Mark with a question. I'm going to hold off this question just a little bit because we just kind of want to go through what just happened on this launch, and then we'll get to the other question here about some other things that are happening in and around with SpaceX. But yes, oh, excuse me, as I choke.
Chris, you good there?
Yeah, I'm good. But yes, a successful initial launch for Starlink. You can see stage 2 there, safely in orbit. Stage 1 successfully on its drone ship. And now we await the reignition of the second stage, as Thomas was saying, and the deployment of the 60 Starlink satellites that are on here. We had a good liftoff about 11 minutes ago from the Kennedy Space Center. Nominal orbit was confirmed for the stage 2, so did its job to get the Falcon 9 into its initial parking orbit. You can see the altitude and speed displayed there in the bottom left of your corner. Sam Halter with a $20 super chat. Thanks so much, Sam, saying great coverage as usual. The gator tacos are on me. Yes, a Florida delicacy. Yes. Yes. So a wonderfully successful launch. Is Julia there, Thomas?
She's unmuting. Hold on.
Okay, cool. While Julia's unmuting, Thomas, actually, a good question for you from Acadia here. How did the satellites keep from hitting each other when they deploy? It can't be easy with 60 of them stacked on top of each other.
Funny you should say that, because they don't really. They're kind of actually built to be able to bump into each other a little bit. Obviously, they're deployed all at the same time, and they're all deployed from the same orbital insertion. So they're not exactly moving very fast relative to one another, but they're all just kind of spread out from the Falcon 9 second stage at one time. And every once in a while, that means they're going to maybe bump into one another. That's okay. They're pretty robust satellites. Basically, they will naturally spread out over the next couple hours or so, and they will gradually begin to deploy their solar panels. And then once they're maneuvering, obviously they stagger their maneuvers to make sure they spread out appropriately. So once they're deployed and actually maneuvering and moving towards operational orbits, they don't have recontact issues there. But right after deployment, it's pretty common for them to actually kind of contact one another every once in a while, and that's okay. They're just built to withstand that because that was part of their design. They want to make them, packed against one another and all deployed at once to make a relatively simple deployment mechanism. So they built that into the satellite. So
there we have it. And Julia, Mark Osterland with a £5 super chat wanted to know what's going on with SpaceX's site over in Cocoa.
Well, what's going on over there? Well, there's some new equipment, and as far as I can tell from the research I've done, that equipment is most likely related to manufacturing. So they haven't exactly stopped doing things out at Sideco Road. It's just they've changed exactly what they're doing. What part of the Starship process, though, remains to be seen. I'm still searching for some documentation to see if there's any permitting or licensing, but I have a feeling, just based off of similarity of tanks and equipment, that we are looking at possibly a heat shield manufacturing process being done in Cocoa now.
Because we know they're going to need heat shield piles on the Starships when they start doing their orbital testing.
Exactly. So we do know, based off of job openings and building usage, that there is a manufacturing building in the city of Cape Canaveral. In fact, it's in a building that used to also support the shuttle program and the manufacturing of the tiles that were on the space shuttles. So kind of cool that, yet again, another building is being repurposed from earlier parts of our programs. But yeah, based off of the tanks I've seen over at that Cape Canaveral facility, there's some similarities to what's going on over at Psycho Road. So possibly they do need 2 locations to be able to do that. And I look forward to maybe seeing some of what's produced locally here showing up on starships that Mary sees over in Boca Chica.
Which is awesome, and it's so cool to me too. Like as we progress through new eras, right, and new technologies come online, that some things in spaceflight never change, and some of those things like when you're using tiles and everything for thermal protection system instead of blankets, how that tech and that stuff really has not changed in 40 years, right? The processes that we use to make them are different and upgraded, but it's still like, how they did it for shuttle in the 70s, still the best way to do it.
Exactly, and we still have a workforce here to help support that. So they are actually, I've met people who are working on that program, and people who used to work the shuttle heat shield program are working with SpaceX, and they're learning some of that knowledge and what worked and what didn't work, and adapting it to their processes.
Yeah, which is awesome.
And Julia, Julia over there.
Go ahead, yeah.
I switched over. You can see, just read the instructions over on the left-hand side of the screen. It's almost the center of the screen, actually, but just about to leave Port Canaveral there. Julia, we got that shot of the rocket launching right over the top of Lauren Foss was right in the foreground as the rocket launched. So
that's an incredible shot.
I'm already downloading the video to time-lapse it. So.
And just to interject really quickly, I'm going to start packing up the remote camera that we have here at the press site, so that camera feed will go offline in just a second here, okay?
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Thomas.
Okay, then I've still got questions to get through. If we're good to keep taking them while they start to break down,
yeah, I'll still be
yes.
on comms, just no camera feed. Sorry.
Okay,
we're
perfect,
still listening.
Perfect.
I'm just editing, and he's just tearing down. We're good. I have a picture inbound very soon, y'all.
Awesome, and obviously let us know. I know from being there too, like sometimes you don't get a lot of warning when it's like, okay, you guys got to leave now. So just let us know when you've got to pack up or actually like physically leave there. But Acadia with another question here wanted to know what makes SpaceX retire a booster. Is it number of flights? Is it something to do about refurbishment cost? Basically, what makes them retire a booster? So the only reasons, and check me on this if I'm misremembering one, but the only way we've seen them retire a booster that they actually recovered first was either on the original round of recoveries with the Block 3s, which were only designed to be reused once. And then they were either thrown away into the ocean on their second mission, or they were recovered for landing and recovery practices, brought back and scrapped. And of the Block 5s, I believe the only ones that we have seen retired from ones that they actually got back was the booster that launched CRS-16 that went for a swim in the Atlantic Ocean after a successful landing, and they actually towed that one back to Port Canaveral, hauled it out of the water, and got what they could off of it before scrapping it. But that's the only time we've seen them retire one, correct?
I would say honestly that a booster lets us know when it's ready to be retired, because I don't think they have plans to just retire them unless there is, I suppose, major damage found. So in their own way, the boosters are letting us know when they're ready to be done.
Yeah, and I know part of the question here is obviously stemming from the sort of conflicting answers that have been given about like how long can the state, how many times can you refly a booster, right? Where we've heard Elon say each one is designed for reflight up to 100 times, which is true. and was the same with each of the space shuttle orbiters. Actually, each one of them were designed for to fly 100 times, but obviously be refurbished. Falcon 9s have to be refurbished or like taken out of rotation for more detailed inspections after every 10 flights. But one interesting thing that Gwen Shotwell said a few months ago, we'll see how much this is true since the Air Force and Space Force have now switched over to flight-proven boosters as well. But she did say that there were a lot of customers who just wanted to pay the extra money for new boosters. And Gwen said, well, all right, if you want to pay us for a new booster, I have no problem building one for you if you want to pay for it. There is a bit of uncertainty in terms of how many flights a Falcon 9 will get to, but 10 before some in-depth inspections and 100 total for each booster is the target that they've aimed for here. And Veer wanting to know what's the total number of satellites in space after this launch? So total number of satellites in space, like total from everyone, I have no idea. To be very, very honest, it's over 3,000 at this point. Satellites that have been launched, including all of the Starlinks. We're probably pushing 4,000 there with all of the Starlinks at this point. In terms of the basic answer to that question, in terms of Starlink satellites, today's launch makes 835 Starlinks that have been launched at this point and reached space. Klaus wanting to know where was the security gator? A nice joking reference there to the fact that we tend to refer to the wildlife as the security of Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center. There are gators in almost every watering hole that you see around the Space Center, and we lovingly refer to them as the security, and sometimes we like to show them on the launch streams. I'm guessing there was not one there today.
Nope, I did not see a gator, just, a bird who didn't care.
An unimpressed bird. The birds are very unimpressed out there, which I'm personally unimpressed by. They should care more about their environment and where they live. But it is.
I think he just wants to look cool.
There we go. Yes, he's in front of its friends. Like, hey, I don't care. It's a rocket, man. Yes.
And let it be very clear, even if you do not see the KC security gators, they always see you. They're there. You just don't see them.
This is true. This is true.
But on that note, here at the press site, I'm going to sign off because we are going to get going here, and I think Julie's going to sign off here in a second too. But stay tuned. The mission is still continuing. Falcon 9's second stage and the Starlink satellites still headed towards their final burn and deployment. But from here at the Kennedy Space Center press site, we've had an good liftoff so far, and we're going to sign off from here.
That sounds good. Thanks, Thomas, and thanks, Julia, for getting up early and being out there. I know it was a super early morning for both of you today.
It was my pleasure, and I'll spend my last few minutes here at the press site. I'm going to upload a couple pictures, and y'all have a wonderful day. And before I sign off, just thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you for the super chats. Your support is amazing and so much appreciated.
And thank you. That was Julia. Now I'm seeing our numbers tick way down. We're not going off air. Julia and Thomas are just leaving the press site. We were going to stay live. We still got a few more questions that we were going to get through. And if you have any more questions, continue to ask. Definitely continue to ask. I've seen a bunch of you still asking some things. So we're not going anywhere just yet. But I did just want to say a huge thank you to Julia Bergeron and to Thomas Berghardt. You saw their social media profiles flash up there on screen again, but they were our two NASA spaceflight reporters who were out there at the Kennedy Space Center this morning for the launch of Starlink. Those wonderful tracking shots and wonderful live camera views you saw coming from Thomas. So a huge thank you to both Julia and Thomas for their work today. So again, if you've got any questions, you can keep on putting them in chat. We're about 24 minutes after liftoff here, heading toward a reignition of the second stage and the ultimate deployment of the Starlink of the Starlink satellites here. And Berber 2 Million wanted to know, I watched the SAOCOM 1A mission recently, and I was confused because there was both a boost back and a drone ship landing. So can you explain flight profiles? Yes, so this is a great question. So basically there are two types of recovery profiles that a Falcon 9 can fly in general. And that is either one downrange to the drone ship, like the one we saw today, and the one you saw on, and the ones that we've seen from Vandenberg, where they make it to the drone ship, but they might do a boost back burn, or they might just continue onward. So that's one way they do it. And then the second way is to do a full return to launch site landing, which involves the boost back burn. And the reason I'm going to say it that way is because your specific question has to do with the boost back burn, and this can get a bit tricky. But so basically, you're either going to land it on the drone ship or you're going to return it to the launch site. And if you return it to the launch site, you're going to do a boost back burn, and that requires more reserve in the main propellant tanks of the Falcon 9. So unlike the Starship, which we've seen them testing at Boca Chica with the header tank, Falcon 9 doesn't have header tanks, so they just have to leave enough propellant, RP1 kerosene, and liquid oxygen in the two tanks of Falcon 9 in order to facilitate a landing, whatever kind of a landing that is, and then how much propellant you have left can dictate whether or not you can return to launch site or you have to go to the drone ship. Now, when you're going to the drone ship, all that means is that you don't have enough propellant to make it back completely to your launch site. You can still have some missions that just barely pass that limit of being able to return to the launch site and still have enough propellant in their tanks where they can do a boost back, even though they're landing on the drone ship downrange. And this is done to slow Falcon 9 down, make the entry forces a little bit less on the vehicle because you can slow it down quicker. And you can create a much more gentler re-entry profile down to your drone ship. And the benefit of doing a boost back burn, even when you're landing on the drone ship when you can, is that usually gets you closer to the port that you're trying to get the vehicle back to. So it's less days at sea. It's easier on the crews that are out there that have to go to the drone ship after a booster lands to secure it and get it ready for the tow back. So when that's possible, you will see them do a boost back burn, even for a drone ship landing. But they don't always have to, and they don't always have enough propellant to do so. So a lot of our high energy missions to geostationary transfer orbit and heavy low Earth orbit missions like Starlink flights don't have enough propellant left to do that boost back, even for landing on the drone ship. And those are the ones you see just continue to arc and coast passively downrange until they get there. So a long-winded answer to that, but I hope that answered your question, Berber, and I hope you were still around. I know you asked that quite a while ago. I hope you were still around to hear the answer to that. Another good question here that transitions a little bit to Starship, and we do have a few Starship questions that came in here. Dominic was asking, will the Deer Moon mission launch from Pad 39A? This is a great question, and to be fair, with the Starship launch manifest, not just its test cadence, but even its actual launch manifest, we don't know which facilities they're going to go from yet. We don't know if that would be a Boca Chica flight or a 39A mission. Nor do we know the one that they just won from NASA to demonstrate the transfer of cryogenic propellants around in cislunar space. We also don't know which one that will be launching from either. And a large part of that is that SpaceX doesn't know which one that's going to be going from either. And at what point Boca will transition from a test facility to a launch facility. How much infrastructure do you need to build up in Boca in order to do not just test orbital launches, but then actual orbital missions for customers, and how that might be easier to do it at Boca versus Kennedy, or easier to do at Kennedy versus Boca. We just don't know yet. And SpaceX themselves are still very firmly in that test campaign as well. So it's a great question about the pads that they'll go from, but we just don't know yet. And Michael, this is definitely one for you. Deegan is asking, do we have any predicted updates on when SN8 might static fire and then fly. And I know, again, I just picked Deegan's. It was the first one I saw, but many of our listeners and viewers and channel members had this exact same question. If we know any notional dates yet.
We have the road closure seen up. But anyway, there's the current schedule of closures. So the closure today is from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. And then there's also a closure tomorrow if they need it from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Central Time again. Both of these closure dates are opportunities for the pre-burner test and the static fire test that need to happen before they install the nose cone. And then after the nose cone is installed, there will be another set of closures for another static fire, followed then, if all goes well, presumably by the 15-kilometer hop. So we only have the dates for the next 2 days of testing so far. There's a lot of uncertainty with the remaining of the testing schedule. It is very unlikely that they will get the pre-burner test off and the static fire test off both on the same night, although they're trying to do them both back to back, but that assumes that everything goes flawlessly. So given it's a new vehicle with some upgraded ground support equipment, it'll likely take longer than they think. So until the first round of the static fire test is complete, there's a lot of uncertainty as to when the next round of testing is going to happen. So it's basically a day-by-day timeline, and they're only really going to have their next event with a date until that event is cleared. They don't know the date for the next hurdle, but it's one step at a time with Starship SN8.
Go and again, we're standing by for that reignition of the second stage, which is a 2-second burn. So very short. In fact, 2 seconds, Michael. It might not even look like the engine ignites fully because of the insane thrust to weight ratio of the Falcon 9 at this point, which is something like 5.7 to 1 or 6 to 1 or something like that. It's an incredibly powerful stage.
Yeah. It will not turn red. The nozzle will not turn red by the time the burn is complete.
Yeah, so we'll say that again when we get closer. But again, we're just standing by for that very quick 2-second burn of the second stage to alter the Falcon 9's trajectory from its parking orbit, which it is in right now, to its deployment altitude. And again, that burn is coming up here per the clock on the mission audio, or per the clock on the mission timer in about 12 minutes from now. But yeah, so Alan Gable was asking, and this goes back to something we were talking about before liftoff, about what the issue is with the Merlin engines. All we know is what Elon tweeted, which said it had something to do with the gas generators on the Merlin engine, and again, how many of the Merlin engines on the GPS mission back in September, a few weeks ago, we don't know. All we know is that they had one. It was enough for Elon to come down and want to personally inspect the hardware, and it was enough that mission has really gone TBD, to be determined on the manifest. But the other interesting thing that we're seeing isn't just that the Starlink missions are continuing, but that Crew 1 got delayed by at least 11 days because of this. But other missions from NASA and other paying customer missions have not moved at this point yet. In fact, NASA confirmed on Friday that the Sentinel-6 flight out of Vandenberg is still on for the 10th of November, with Crew 1 slated to follow no earlier than a day later on the 11th. And so again, we're not entirely sure exactly what's happening with that investigation, how much of it is contained to just that vehicle, how much of it might be systemic, how much of it clearly isn't, because Starlinks are still launching. The rest of the manifest doesn't appear to be too affected by it in some ways. So again, there's a lot of uncertainty, and until Elon or SpaceX wants to say what it was, we really don't have anything else to add to that investigation, just to sort of confirm that, yeah, there are things that are a little bit odd because you have this seemingly major issue, but yet flights are continuing both on the internal only manifest and a very prominent customer in NASA saying that that one of their missions is also completely unaffected by it. So that we know now. So we'll be looking for more information, but that's where we think we are right now with everything there. Another good question here from Piper Sol, asking, will Starlink make the loss of tracking signal that rockets seem to have obsolete? It's a good question. And in some ways, yes, they can. And in much the same way that NASA's TDRS network, the Tracking and Data Satellite Relay Network, operates, where that rockets can communicate up with it if they are out of range of tracking stations. We see this most often for missions that go due east out of the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and are out over the Atlantic before arriving within range of some of the tracking stations in on the western coast of Africa. The Delta 4s, the Atlas 5s, and the Antares rocket, which goes southeast out of Virginia, can all talk to the TDRS network as they go out over the oceans for continuous coverage. So in that regard, Starlink would operate very similar to that for SpaceX missions, where the Falcon 9s would communicate upward with them instead of to the ground tracking stations. So a great question, the answer to which is yes, it could make it obsolete, as our technology already does. Now, what works in favor for a lot of these northeasterly missions out of the Cape and Kennedy area is that the tracking stations located on the eastern seaboard of the U.S. and Canada and across the Atlantic in Western Europe permit complete signal coverage for the vehicles as they go up. So you'll hear them say loss of signal Bermuda, but they're being tracked by two other tracking stations in New Hampshire and Canada at that point when they lose the signal from Bermuda. So they can just kind of roll forward. But ultimately, yes, Starlink would be able to serve that role of launch vehicle communications over the oceans as well. Hey, Michael, take a look at the super chat in the queue and tell me if that is one thing you can answer, because it's not something that I can personally answer off the top of my head.
Good question.
Yeah, I don't really want to put it up if neither of us can answer it.
1 second.
Okay, cool. All right. Nosi, we see the super chat, and we're checking to get you an answer on that. So stand by on that one for us. Yeah, so DJ was also asking here, does the Falcon 9 have header tanks like Starship, or does all of its fuel come from the main tanks for landing? That's a great question. Yeah, so this is another part of where the two systems, Falcon 9 and Starship, are radically different from one another. Falcon 9 does not have header tanks. There is just one kerosene tank and one oxygen tank in both the second and first stages. So you have to leave enough RP1 kerosene and liquid oxygen in your main propellant tanks for the associated boost back, entry, and landing burns. And of course, boost back doesn't always have to happen, so you at the very least have to leave enough for the entry and the landing burns for the vehicles in those tanks. But great question there. Great question. Rolling through some of these other questions that we have here, some of which we've answered before. Again, we're still standing by. We don't have any word on the fairing catch attempt. That usually comes about 40 to 45 minutes after liftoff. Oh, right on schedule. There's one in the net. Although it looks like it smashed right through the net. Oh my goodness. Well,
quick cut away.
Still a catch. Still a catch. May have destroyed the net. It's still a catch. So yes, right on cue there. Thank you, SpaceX Stream, for continuing to do that every time we want to talk. Well, they got one of them. At least that was pretty funny. They got one of them, so now we'll wait and see exactly what happened there, because it definitely looked like the net was a bit damaged, but it did look like the payload fairing was intact on one of the fairing catcher ships. So we'll see. We'll wait to see if both of them caught it, or if just one caught and the other splashed down, and what exactly happened with that recovery. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily unexpected, given how wild these catch attempts are, because unless you're watching them on the maritime tracking thing, it's really hard to explain how much Go Mystery and Go Mischief are dodging and weaving and reversing and slamming full force ahead to try to get directly under the payload fairings as they come down. So we'll wait to see, but that was just a funny image to flip over to all of a sudden there.
I'm trying to tell if the fairing was damaged or not. I don't see any obvious signs, but it definitely came in hard.
Yeah, the net is definitely torn in places from what I saw, right? I know you've got the script. You've probably got it.
Yeah, I mean it's
paused,
super low quality from that camera, but I don't.
Yeah.
The net I think has to be torn, or the arms have to be damaged or something to get the net down that low. But it's hard to tell if the fairing has been damaged or not from that impact.
Gotcha. But they got it, so it'll count. It'll count as a recovery at the very least. So another great question here. That the chat just totally updated and I lost. So hang on, I can't get it on. Sorry, there was a really, really great question here that I just saw. Oh, Ed, yes. Ed is wanting to know what has SpaceX done with the remaining Block 4 boosters? So the Block 4s for recovery and reuse, when they were used twice, some of them were simply expended on their final missions, but some of them were used as landing tests to gain more experience with recovery operations, even though they were not going to be reused. Those are sitting at random places in and around Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, or have been trucked out to other SpaceX facilities at this point. But they are kind of just lying around at this point with no. They obviously will not be reused at that point. But I would also have to assume that SpaceX has taken off of them what they could grab that was still reusable and still valid for them. So, but the boosters are just kind of in and about different areas. You can see some of them as you drive around Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. So at 42 minutes after the launch, you can see Falcon 9 here getting ready for the reignition of the Merlin 1D engine here. The reignition is scheduled to occur at 44 minutes and 4 seconds, so about 2 minutes from now. And just a quick reminder, as we head toward this burn, it will be a very, very brief 2-second burn from 4404 to 4406. And it will look like the engine has not properly ignited. Because if you remember, a 2-second engine burn, but it takes the Falcon 9 3 seconds from engine ignition command to full thrust to complete the ignition sequence. So this is going to be a very brief burn that will look odd. Nobody panic when it doesn't look like the engine ignited fully here in about a minute and 20 seconds from now. And this goes perfectly with the question that we have from Elliot Slater. So sorry that it's 90 minutes ago, Elliot. I hope you're still around to hear the answer to this. But Elliot was wanting to know, is the second stage still fully fueled for this mission, even if they don't need all of the propellant that would go into that stage? It's a great question, because a lot of times missions don't require the full amount of propellant that goes into their second stages, but they are always fueled fully. Always fuel your rocket stages fully, no matter what, because if there's an underperformance of the first stage, that extra propellant can actually help you get completely into orbit, which we have seen most recently on an Atlas V rocket, where there was a huge underperformance of the Atlas V booster, and a planned 8-minute burn of the Centaur, which would have left 4 minutes of propellant in its tanks, actually required a burn to depletion to barely get the Centaur and its payload into low Earth orbit. And there was only half a second of propellant margin remaining, and I'm going to shut up here because 4 seconds to the burn. And based on timing, that should have started and stopped at this point. There we go. I keep forgetting there's like a 30-second delay. My apologies. But there we go. We can see the engine. And you can see why we wanted to prep you for the fact that it might look a bit weird, because that was it. That was exactly what it was supposed to do. That brief 2-second puff, not getting to a full engine ignition there because of the crazy high thrust to weight ratio. At this point, with propellant somewhat depleted, if they lit that Merlin engine, it would be a thrust to weight ratio of roughly 5.5, 5.7 to 1 on the Falcon 9, which is an incredible thrust to weight ratio. So they don't need a huge reignition of the engine to tweak the orbit there. And now now you can see the stage beginning its reorientation for the planned deployment of the Starlinks an hour and 3 minutes after liftoff here, or just about 15 minutes from now. What do we want our plan to be, guys? 15 minutes to Starlink deployment. I'm good to keep asking questions and answering questions and keep rolling here. If we've come 45 minutes, might as well stay for the hour. I'm thinking. But do you guys have any reason why that might not work from your end?
I'm here, Chris. I mean, I can continue hanging out. I'm actually editing the time lapse video while I'm listening to you answer questions. So.
Oh, perfect. Then that works. Then let's just keep going.
Oh,
So.
I think I sort of have an answer to the super chat now.
Okay, perfect. So yes, so Nosi with the £5 super chat was asking, what is the difference between a gas generator and a pre-burner?
And I have a blog post from NASA on the J2X engine that I'll put in chat that has some more information. But I think, from my understanding, is that a gas generator is a pre-burner. It's a specific type of pre-burner, whereas the gas is not injected back through the engine like on a on a staged combustion cycle engine like Raptor. So instead, on a gas generator, the excess exhaust is just thrown out the engine, the side of the engine, but it's not sent through the main combustion chamber like on a staged combustion cycle. So a gas generator refers to a pre-burner on an open cycle engine, whereas that is when like I said, the exhaust does not go through the main combustion chamber. It has like a separate exhaust valve. But on a staged combustion cycle engine, that is when the pre-burner exhaust goes straight through the main combustion chamber. So Raptor is an example of a staged combustion cycle engine, and Merlin is a open cycle engine.
Yeah. Look at the ice buildup on that little port there. Did you see that, Michael?
No, I'll have to rewind.
Yeah, rewind it just before they cut away to this graphic. There was it looked like a cool little ice formation that was building up on the outside of the stage, which is really cool that you can see all of that. But awesome, and thank you for finding that answer, Michael. And Nosi, I hope that answers your question about the difference between a gas generator and a pre-burner. All right, just rolling through some of these here for what we have started.
Yeah, it sounds like Nosi got it. So that's good.
Gotcha. So Lucas here with a question. When do you see the Falcon family getting retired and making way for Starship? Yeah, so it has been Elon's stated goal that what he envisions is that Starship will take over from Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. There's been no date that's been set for that. There's a lot of development work that still needs to go into Starship and certification, and of course it needs to do orbital test flights as well. The test campaign, I mean, by anyone's measure, has gone incredibly well at Boca Chica. To date, no one said developing a reusable methalox system, methane and oxygen for the engines, was going to be easy, but the campaign does seem to be going very, very well in South Texas. But exactly when they would actually start taking missions from the Falcon 9s and the Falcon Heavies is heavily dependent on how quickly the development process goes and how quickly people get comfortable with a vehicle, a major vehicle like Starship, and everything that it's going to do. But of course, we've seen industry shifts already happening and thought processes shifting greatly in the direction that Starship is going to be very, very beneficial if the system works. And most notably, you can see that from NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine when NASA chose Starship as one of the 3 potential designs for the lunar landing system for the Artemis program. And Jim Bridenstine was very clear that Starship was not a system that NASA could ignore. And this is almost word for word. It's not an exact quote, but he basically said we can't afford to ignore it because if it works, it's a game changer. So you can see the industry's thoughts on that shifting and everything. So we'll see, but nothing concrete. And I don't think SpaceX really wants to make a concrete statement about when they want to start that shift over because of how new Starship is. And remember, it's easy to get excited about a new system coming online, but remember the ease and the cadence with which we largely see Falcon 9s flying. Now they still have their issues here or there, but the large ease that we see them fly with and how they look very easy and how SpaceX has made that look very easy is a decade's worth of work, and more than a decade's worth of work, just a decade since the Falcon 9 started flying. So remember, it took us that long to get here with the Falcon 9. It might take that long to get there with Starship too. So it'll happen. It's planned to happen, but exactly when is really dependent on how the development process unfolds, how quickly it unfolds, and what is uncovered along the way that needs to be fixed and tweaked. There. HW, thanks so much for the new membership, as well as Eagle Kepper. Thanks so much for new channel memberships from both of you. Thank you so much. That continued monthly support really, really means a lot to us and really helps us in our planning for what we can do and what we can and new projects and new initiatives that we can aim to bring online here. So thank you those channel memberships and the super chats and just watching our stream and watching that ad at the beginning is supporting our stream. I know ads are annoying. Every time I go to YouTube, I can't wait to click that skip button myself on videos, but it really does help us. Even watching that skippable ad, that's helping and that's contributing. So thank you to everyone who watches and does that, and then a special thank you to our members and those who send super chats as well, including Andy, A-N-D-E. I'm gonna go with Andy. I'm very sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But Andy with the 10 Australian here saying, evening guys, thanks for the great coverage. Given the inevitable movement to carbon neutrality, do you think all newly developed rockets within the next decade or so will move to hydrolox? Well, that's a great question. The exact opposite. So I understand where you're coming from with this question, right? Because hydrolox engines that burn hydrogen and oxygen, their byproduct is water. Hydrolox rockets are some of the most carbon neutral and environmentally friendly rockets that we have because the exhaust is water. Now, of course, there's other parts to the exhaust too, depending on like what Michael was saying. Is it closed loop engine? Is it open loop engine? What other things is it potentially throwing off? But the point being that the amount of quote unquote pollutants that would go into the atmosphere from a hydrolox engine are greatly reduced because it's pumping water vapor into the atmosphere from that combustion exhaust that shoots out the bottom of it. And it's one reason why if you only burn that and your way of keeping the engine nozzle cool is not ablative, the flame and the exhaust that comes out of a hydrolox engine is clear. The most obvious example of this, shout out to John Krause, is the space shuttle main engines and what will be the SLS main core stage engines, which will burn very, very clear because they're hydrogen and oxygen, and the cooling system on the engines is actually a closed loop cooling system where they pump liquid hydrogen through the engine nozzle first to keep the engine nozzle cool, and then the hydrogen goes into the burners and is ignited and used as the propellant for the engines. But on the Delta IV Heavy from Launch Alliance, even though it is a Hydrolox engine, it keeps its engine nozzles cool through ablative cooling. So it's burning off heat shield material in those engines, and that's what creates the really dense orange flame on that Hydrolox engine for the Delta IV. So slightly calculus there. But to your specific question, Andy, actually, most rockets are going toward Methalox now instead of Hydrolox. And even Keralox is still under development with the Angara 5 for Russia. So Russia is actually transferring their entire rocket fleet, this is their plan at least, to consolidate down to just 2 basic rocket variants, which would be either the Soyuz rocket, which burns kerosene and oxygen, or the Angara rocket and its multiple configurations, which also burns kerosene and oxygen. So Russia is swinging toward Keralox. The United States is swinging far more toward Methalox at this point in its development stages with Vulcan, New Glenn, and Starship. So actually, a move away from Hydrolox, which is interesting. And also too where we wound up with Hydrolox engines, because if you sort of walk yourself up the efficiency scale for the engines in terms of the propellant that they use when you look at ISP and specific impulse, Hydrolox engines get you a little more efficiency than Keralox engines, and Methalox engines get you a little more efficiency, or a lot more efficiency depending on your design, than Hydrolox engines can. So that's why there's been a swing on the U.S. side toward the Methalox side of the equation for propulsion, because you can make more efficient engines, and when you look at it from an ISP perspective than you can from Hydrolox and Keralox engine. But a great question there, Andy. Just gonna look for a little more here. So this is a great question. Das and Michael, I'm going to ask this to you too, because Das, I know you have I know this is one of the things you really, really love to talk about because of what it means and a lot of the challenges that are coming with it. But we have a question here from Acadia who wants to know, would you all be willing to ride an Earth-to-Earth Starship? I'm super excited for the idea of that, but I'm sure the G-force would be a problem for some people. I know Das and I have wildly different answers to this. So Das, why don't you go first?
See, Chris, I like to stay alive. Maybe you have different opinions on the matter, but I will not be riding a point-to-point any sort of rocket if it doesn't have some sort of auxiliary landing besides landing on the engines. I want something that can glide to a landing on a runway as opposed to rely on the engines. I'm not saying that other people do that. Cargo rockets, sure. Please give me some sort of suborbital space plane before I go tail first down to the ground on an engine landing. That's just me, though.
There we go.
That's go. Crap it like a roller coaster ride, right? You're like, hey, send me to China or wherever. Maybe not.
So I have my answer to this question, which is sort of predicated, which I will give first, which is yes, I would write it. But there's a caveat to that. I think this is the most ambitious and hardest part of the Starship plan, which sounds insane when you're probably going, but Chris, like, come on, this is supposed to be meant to colonize Mars, and like Elon has a plan of sending like 100 of these together at the same time to Mars, which that trans-Mars injection burn would look sick from the ground if you could see it at night, of 100 starships leaving Earth orbit at the same time. But no, I really think Earth point-to-point is the most ambitious and hard part of the system, not because of the technology. I think they could actually do that first from just a sheer throw it up into the atmosphere, bring it back down somewhere at some point on the planet, 45 minutes later, depending on where you're going. It's the regulatory process from all of these nations that are going to have to fall into line, because it's a really different step from saying, okay. We're okay with a little bit of land overflight with the Falcon 9s going out on southern polarly trajectories now from Florida. To we are going to bring a rocket in under retropropulsion over major populated areas for landings and takeoffs routinely. That's a very, very, very different leap to make. And I know SpaceX has been talking about using offshore platforms for those launches and those landings, but those offshore platforms would still largely be controlled by the airspace of the various nations that these would be landing and going toward. And of course, when you're doing Earth point to point, you go by the path of least resistance, which might mean that that platform's 15 kilometers offshore and safe, but it might mean that the overflight portion to get there is overland and overpopulated areas. And that's going to be a huge, huge thought process change for the entire world to get used to rockets coming over us like that. Now, we made that transition with aircraft. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying that's a huge regulatory hurdle, which I think is much harder to overcome than launching out over the ocean and then reigniting your engines in space to go to Mars. So I think Earth point to point is the last part of this system that we'll see. No doubt that they and the other companies that are working on Earth point to point via either supersonic transportation or actual rocket technology and suborbital flights, I think we'll end up making a way to find it. I think we'll end up finding a way to make it work, and I'm very happy to fly them. I just think it's the hardest part to convince nations here on Earth of that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Das, aside from the safety perspective.
I mean, I just think it's a safety perspective. I think with the safety perspective, you're going to have trouble getting through all the regulatory stuff. And if you had a safer way of coming down, or at least some sort of backup system for the landing, you would be easy, good through the regulatory stuff a little bit easier, right? So I just inherently as a design, and I don't want to be the guy who was on the horseless carriage right before the plane started flying. And I think we'll get there someday. It's just I think that from a pure engineering perspective, having wings that can glide if the engines don't turn on and touch down softly is just a whole heck of a lot safer than landing on the engines or ending up 100 feet underground.
Yeah. And Das, I think right specifically what you are referring to are I know in North America, Europe, many Asian nation airspaces as well. There's the ETOPS guidelines for the engines about how far can the plane glide if it loses one engine, if it loses two engines, when you're on these large transatlantic or these long-haul transatlantic flights.
Somewhere else? Is there another runway you can land on? How long do you have to react? All sorts of things there that you just don't get if you're landing on your tail. Chris, looks like we're coming up on the deploy, I think.
We are. So per the countdown clock, we're about a minute, less than a minute out here. So you can see that they're ready for the deployment here. So yeah, deployment coming up momentarily in the next few seconds here of the latest round of 60 Starlink satellites. You can see they're at 285 kilometers in altitude. Now they are over the southern ocean, off the southern coast of Australia, approaching New Zealand right now, or about to swing up past New Zealand, I should say, is where they are in orbit. And you just heard them say Starlink deployment confirmed, so 20-ish seconds from now is when we should see that happen on our screen, given the timing delays for the broadcast. Oh, and you can see Earth. Look at Earth. Look at the sun. Look at the sunrise, Das.
Nice.
On Earth's horizon. Look at that. Oh, there go the tension rods. And there go the Starlinks. So there you can see all 60 of them floating away. This is still mind-blowing. I mean, we're talking about mind-blowing, Das. Like, it's still odd to me that, even though they're built to withstand this, it's still so odd to me that the deployment process is just like, let them hit.
Just let them go. It's a very clever way to deploy things.
It really is. I love it. Just like, what's the easiest way to do it? Build them to withstand impacting each other. You can see the train of satellites moving out of range of some of the light sources that they have on the top of the second
Yeah.
stage there of the Falcon 9. Go
A
ahead,
quick
Michael.
update. A quick update on the fairing situation. SpaceX just gave an answer to what happened on the webcast. The view we saw was from Miss Tree, and apparently one of the corners of the net gave way, and that's what caused the fairing to come down. But the good news is it sounds like Miss Chief also had a catch, so a dual fairing catch today.
Ooh, very nice, very nice. Dual fairing catches, we like that. We like.
And Chris, I had posted in the back channel, I don't mean to be too quiet or terse here, but I'm trying very hard to display the time lapse before we run out of feed here. So if you'll give me just a second, we'll have a time lapse from the fleet cam showing just read the instructions and the launch in the background. I think it's the first time we've got something like that. I mean, I know.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I know you're busy editing that. So let me grab a couple of other questions that have come in since then. Yeah, definitely. We are definitely looking for that. Did our thing just switch to a different video when the SpaceX feed
Yes,
cut?
I was just switching it over to the fleet cam because the SpaceX thing just stopped. So
gotcha. Okay,
to,
wanted to make sure.
Yeah, the video that we have right now, the remote we have live, is coming from Port Canaveral.
Gotcha. So that is a live shot of Port Canaveral. Gotcha. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So just scrolling through chat to try to find some other things that are there. Jane is pointing out that when we were having our conversation about the future rockets that Roscosmos was developing, and I had mentioned that the plan is to basically shift almost everything to the Soyuz and Angara rocket. There is the planned Amur rocket from Roscosmos, but that I don't know what the status. I don't know when that one will actually come online, or if they are actually going to finish it. It's kind of planned. You're seeing what Jane is saying there. Like it is planned, but it isn't, and we don't know if they're going to finish it or not. So of course, there's always the possibility that Roscosmos could end up with more than just the Soyuz and the Angara, but at least for the immediacy of that is their plan in terms of the switchover and the ability to save costs, mainly because the Soyuz and the Angara are very modular in their designs, right? You can add the frigate upper stage to the Soyuz to give it extra capabilities for GTO, geostationary orbit insertion, and planetary flights. And yes.
Chris, we might have lost you for the end of that there. You went a little robotic-y, and then I think we lost the last part of your comment.
Hey, God, yes, because I realized that I had SpaceX's mission audio stream up on another YouTube channel, and all of a sudden it started speaking to me about a different stream that was not ours, and that confused me for a second until I realized where the voice is. Because I was like, why are we playing audio from someone else's stream? And then I realized
is not me.
It's just what YouTube decided to flip over to on my other browser.
So I do have this, Chris. Let's
yes.
let's see how this goes really quickly. But I do have the time lapse from Port Canaveral. Check this out. So this is actually a replay. This is a sped up replay. As just read the instructions. Whoa, we got some pixelization there on that, don't we? Yeah, that is a little bit too choppy. It must just be a little bit. Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I tried to get this out as fast as I could, but I'm gonna have to upload that separately. It looks like to get that to play cleanly. But you can see, you can see the replay. Yeah, there we go. Did you see the launch in there?
Yeah. You could definitely see Falcon 9 heading up and downrange.
Yeah, it was not happy with me the way I was trying to replay that though. So.
Gotcha.
Trying to get that done. I'll get that up on Twitter or something like that. I didn't upload it to the server. I was trying to pipe it through a different way, but Let's.
All right, and a good ending question for us here today with Starlink successfully in orbit following a launch about an hour and 10 minutes ago. A good ending question comes from Ocean Weish Jones. I hope I said your name correctly. If I did not, my sincerest apologies. But wanting to know, basically, when will the booster and the fairing halves come back? Is the question. So so the fairing halves could be back in tomorrow, tomorrow evening, tomorrow night. One of the wonderful things about Fleet Cam, which you are looking at here, is even if they're tricky and come in and sneaky and come in the dead middle of the night, which sometimes the payload fairings do, we'll see it and we'll be able to grab it and capture it and record it. Boosters usually take about 3 days to come back. So this would be either a Tuesday evening return to Port Canaveral or a Wednesday morning return. So either Tuesday evening or Wednesday morning for the booster. Probably tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow night for the fairing halves to come back in. Again, all of that is super predicated on how quickly they can secure the booster and the payload fairings and how quickly they can start back to Port Canaveral. But usually 3 days for a booster, a day and a half, 2 days for the fairings, depending on seat conditions. And when the booster comes back, we will definitely bring you that as it comes back into Port Canaveral. But with that, I think that's an excellent place to end it. For those of you still watching, thank you so much for staying with us throughout the entirety of the broadcast. We did get to most of your questions. There were some that were that we'll endeavor to answer later that had to do with things that weren't SpaceX. And we'd like to try as much as possible to keep it onto the mission that we're at when we're constrained by time like we were today. But thank you so much for joining us. My name is Chris Gebhardt. I'm the Assistant Managing Editor of NASASpaceflight. I've been the person answering your questions since my colleagues Thomas Burghardt and Julia Bergeron, who were live at the Kennedy Space Center and brought us the NSF cam work from the liftoff. They were there today as well. And then John Galloway was here behind the scenes, as well as Michael Baylor producing and operating Fleet Cam, which we are looking at now. And Fleet Cam is, of course, a partnership between NASASpaceflight and Rusty's Seafood and Oyster Bar in Port Canaveral. Make sure to give Rusty some love and check him out next time you're in town. And speaking of checking it out, why not head on over to nasaspaceflight.com/shop or store? Which one is it? I always forget this. I should know this.
Oh,
I should.
Shop.
Yeah, shop.
Thank you. Yes, nasaspaceflight.com/shop. If you want to check out some of the merchandise that we have over there. I know we got some questions earlier on in the broadcast. If you do not live in the United States, you can totally order from it. If it tells you that your country is not available, simply let us know, and we will go ahead and finish off the process of adding that. Later, I know there was last month, someone from South Africa asked us why they couldn't order, and it was just a button on our end, and then they were able to order. So if you want our merchandise, that's another way to support us. And if something looks off with your particular country, feel free to ask us about it, and we can always look at it because we want the ordering process to be as smooth as possible. But thank you so much for the various ways that you support us. Fleet Cam is an excellent way of showing you how we use that support to add to our coverage abilities here. So with a successful Starlink launch and a successful 60 batch of Starlinks deployed into orbit, I believe our next stream will be from Boca Chica, Texas, if the road closures hold. Is that correct, Michael?
Yes, we should be live tonight at the earliest. Would be 9 p.m. Central Time or 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, the testing schedule is very fluid, so we're not going to go live until we see activity at the pad that indicates that there's about to be a test. But we're expecting a pre-burner test tonight, followed potentially by a static fire, if all goes well, during the same testing window. So that pre-burner test would hopefully happen sometime between the late evening, but before midnight, and then early tomorrow morning, just a chance of a static fire. And this will be the first round of engine testing that features more than one Raptor engine. So the first firing of 3 Raptor engines could happen early tomorrow morning. So stay tuned.
Absolutely incredible. And as Michael was saying, as soon as we see signs that activity is picking up tonight, if it happens, we will go live when we see that activity because it is a multi-hour test window. We'll also be keeping an eye on the launch manifest out of Florida. There is supposedly another Starlink launch on Wednesday from Pad 40 at 12:30-ish in the afternoon Eastern, 16:30-ish UTC. On Wednesday. So we'll also be looking out for that. But until then, from myself, Chris Gebhardt, and my colleagues, Thomas, Julia, John, and Michael, and all of us at NASASpaceflight, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Have a great rest of your day, no matter where you are in the world.
Chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantic. Flight downside SE off. SE off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.